Hi, I'm Andrew Kane, politics editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and with me are reporters Anna Bryson and Dave Ress, and politics columnist Jeff Shapiro, and we're here to talk about the week that was in Virginia state politics. So I want to start off with some news that arose this morning. Jeff, we had a big announcement in the city of Richmond.
Maybe not entirely unexpected, despite the early press. Tim Kaine announcing for a third term in the U.S. Senate. There was a good deal of anxiety among national and Virginia Democrats since the former governor, didn't meet his early deadline to make a decision. I guess it was some Hamlet-like stagecraft on the part of Tim Kaine, who would clearly go into the 24 cycle distinct favorite. He's already got $4 million in the bank. He has a disciplined campaign organization, and if you listen to him, he's got some favorable polling as well. And Andrew, it's a presidential year when Virginia's bluer reflex tends to be stronger. Presumably that would be a lift for Tim Kaine in seeking and presumably winning a third term.
Now, you've previously reported that Senator Kaine delayed his decision that initially he thought he was going to finalize in December. And what caused him to delay the consideration?
Well, one of the factors was the death of his mother-in-law, Jinx Holton, the widow of Linwood Holton, the first Republican elected governor in Virginia in the 20th century. I mention that because the governor and Mrs. Holton had a special partnership. And I think it was evident today at Senator Kaine's announcement, with the presence of his wife, Ann Holton, an educator, a lawyer, a former judge, that they too have quite the political partnership. If there was a tip-off that the announcement was going to be favorable, at least for Virginia Democrats, it was that Ann Holton was there and Kaine was telegraphing that Virginians would get 2 for 1 if they reelected him next year.
And this announcement came after a roundtable discussion with some young leaders in the Richmond area. And someone posed a question in the scrum afterward asking Senator Kaine about whether there was a prospect of Governor Youngkin challenging him, and Senator Kaine was quick to say, look, I'm not going to put any words in Governor Youngkin's mouth, but he sort of traced our history that would sort of be an unprecedented move in Virginia.
Yeah, since Virginia in 1851 went to a single non-renewable term for its elective governor, no governor has failed to complete his term. And Kaine was suggesting that Youngkin is presumably aware of this tradition, prepared to enforce it. Besides, I think Senator Kaine pointed out that Youngkin's ambitions seem to be more presidential than senatorial.
Even if Governor Youngkin doesn't run for president, I think Kaine was noting that there is some precedent in Virginia for someone serving as governor, Doug Wilder, to seek the presidential nomination, but not for a lesser rung. That hasn't happened yet. All right, let's move on to some other topics. I wanted to mention that Charlotte Woods is reporting about how this morning a Senate subcommittee recommended defeat of several Republican bills to curb abortion, and these sort of ran the gamut, everything from proposals to do away with abortion entirely in Virginia to the governor-backed proposal to ban most abortions after 15 weeks, and a new and interesting wrinkle, Senator Siobhan Dunham, Republican from Henrico, has proposed a bill in which she's seeking some compromise to put the limit around 24 weeks.
But she is also standing for re-election in a redrawn district that looks pretty promising for Democrats, so Democrats say, and Senator Dunham, an OBGYN, is trying to thread the needle on a very tough issue for Republicans, particularly with suburban voters.
Right now, a Senate subcommittee cannot kill legislation, but it was making recommendations to the full committee on what it should do when it next meets next week. I wanted to chat with Anna a little bit about some of the education bills that we saw come up in committee, and there was some significant action there as well. Why don't you let folks know what happened this week?
There were a couple GOP bills that were shot down by the Senate Health and Education Committee that had to do with the sort of parents' rights movement that we've seen really taking a hold here the past couple years. One about school libraries. The bill would have created policies and procedures for librarians picking what books get to go in the libraries, but there are already policies in every school division in Virginia that already does that, and then another bill that would have given parents a heads up on all kinds of activities at schools like pep rallies and things like that. An interesting one that was in the Senate Health and Education Committee, and then also in a House subcommittee, is a bill about school accreditation, which has been a big topic with the governor. It would change, so right now, school accreditation, schools that are doing well can be reviewed once every 3 years. This bill would make it so that schools have to be reviewed for accreditation every single year. The problem in Virginia is that in the code, accreditation and accountability are extremely woven together, which makes things sort of difficult in that aspect, like basically what the administration is saying, because it is an administration-backed bill that we have basically every school is accredited, which doesn't make sense based on how poorly a lot of these schools are performing. Like in late last year, after the scores came out from a congressionally mandated assessment that showed fourth grade reading and math, students are not doing particularly well there. And Governor Youngkin actually promised that by this fall, the accreditation system would be completely overhauled. So this kind of has to do with that a little bit, but that's also going to come up at our next State Board of Education meeting in a couple of weeks in early February.
Now, viewers and readers might recall that, as Anna alluded to, Virginia, like a lot of places, fared poorly on some standardized metrics showing significant learning loss amid COVID-19. And the accreditation standards came out somewhere in that, or the accreditation statistics came out somewhere amid these statistics. And the governor has repeatedly said that he thinks that our accreditation standards need to be overhauled because he doesn't think that they accurately reflect how poorly students are doing. And we also have had reporting that kids of color are faring particularly poorly in learning loss.
Yeah, that was shown pretty prominently in those mandated assessments late last year. And also what the governor has alluded that he wants the accreditation system to look like is something like I'm from Florida, that we had in Florida, which is like a A, B, C, D, F system, so that parents can say, oh, this is an A school, we want to be here, this is an F school, we don't want to go there. The problem from some State Board of Education members with that would be that essentially people would just not be going to those F schools, and that would not be doing anything to bring teachers to those schools either. And also doing something like that without backing up funding to put towards those F schools is a problem from a few of those holdover appointees on the State Board of Education.
So it sounds like more shadow boxing with Governor DeSantis.
Could be.
More to stay tuned on there. All right. Dave, you've had a cross-section of interesting bills that have come up on your watch this week. Let's start off talking about some bills regarding utilities. What's going on with the Dominion-related legislation?
Well, I've been saying for a while it would not be a Virginia General Assembly session if there were not a 20-plus page Dominion bill to fix the regulatory system the way Dominion wants. And as usual, that bill has gone now sort of kind of behind closed doors while we work towards that lovely General Assembly phase of peace in the valley, the different interests coming together with a compromise. There is, interestingly here though, an emerging bipartisan effort to sort of really tighten up on regulation, on the regulation that Dominion's been, pushing back on and successfully easing really since 1997. So that's been familiar, but it's new. There's a new dynamic this time. And at this point, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. There's a different dynamic on another area that I've been paying attention to, which is criminal justice. And this, I think, reflects the divided nature of our legislature. So we had, as one example, the bill that would make that would subject a dealer to a felony homicide charge, a second-degree murder charge, if the drugs that he sold or distributed, even gave, to a user resulted in a fatal overdose. This passed a House gatekeeping panel party line vote. It died in the Senate Judiciary Committee on an almost party line vote.
And the governor expressed some real frustration about that. Tell us, what is the rationale among the folks who are concerned about that bill, and explain to folks what the governor had to say after this took place.
Sure. The concern comes largely from folks who are advocates for better treatment and treatment generally for addiction. And the concern is that it would discourage people from, you're in a situation where you see someone overdosing, from calling. The advocates, Senator Ryan McDougall, for instance, from Hanover, was trying to say, no, it doesn't quite that situation, but that's sort of what the debate is. The governor is, his response the day after the Senate defeated was so heated that I wanted to double check and say, you're going to say you're angry about this? And he wouldn't quite go that far, but he was pretty emphatic that that he objected to this, he would push, and he used his kind of catchphrase, left liberal Democrats, to indicate that this was something that is likely to be politicized.
And folks will recall that we have important elections coming this November with all 140 legislative seats up on the ballot. Dave, you've also seen some interesting movement regarding nursing homes. What happened there?
Yeah, it's funny, because with criminal justice, it sort of feels like we're going to have a deadlock. I suspect we may have the same on abortion. But for the first time in 20 years, a proposal to set minimum staffing standards for nursing homes, which are chronically understaffed, and in much of Virginia, and maybe not the greatest shape, and are clearly already suffering from a lot of vacant positions. But now we have, all of a sudden, consensus. It's moving out of the House Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee, and the nursing home lobby, which has successfully and strenuously fought any such effort in the past for 2 decades, is on board this time. So I'm guessing this one's going to sail.
Interesting. And one other issue that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, of course, is the big issue of the Ford plant. The Times-Dispatch reported earlier this week that 2 sources had told us that Virginia had been told that it was getting this Ford plant. The governor said that fact pattern is not correct. And subsequently, Ford said that it had not, in fact, picked a site. And the governor went on to express concern about how this plant would be structured, that Ford would have one aspect of it, but a Chinese-related firm would be operating the day-to-day and would own the technology. And so the governor is concerned both about the structure and about the Chinese influence there. So Jeff, what is the big picture as we go forward here?
I think in the simplest terms, the governor, as a prospective presidential candidate, is trying to fashion conservative national security credentials. And so he is representing the Ford Motor Company, and its partnership with his Chinese technology company is nothing more than a front for this communist autocracy to make a land grab in Virginia. And so this governor broke off negotiations with Ford over the site in southern Virginia, Pittsylvania County, an area reeling from the collapse of tobacco and textile, and in doing so, erased the possibility of approximately 2,500 jobs and north of $2 billion in investments. I think it's safe to say that the governor's been playing defense on this issue since it got out about a week ago.
Somebody asked Senator Kaine about this morning during his announcement, and the senator had an interesting response, a former governor, of course, who he basically indicated two things can be true at the same time, in that he said, I don't know about the China concerns. He said, if there are legitimate security concerns, then that bears paying attention to. But he said, I also know this, that the Danville area needs jobs. And so
the larger issue there is that rural economic development is a pretty tough nut to crack. Governors, Democratic and Republicans, have been frustrated by this. We're talking about bringing jobs at a significant level to areas where there are fewer people. Often incomes are lower, education levels are lower as well. So here we seem to have an opportunity for a big get, and for reasons that seem more political than policy-based, at least in the view of academics and Democrats. The governor seems more interested in building out the foundation of a potential national candidacy than doing what he did as a businessman, he would say, creating jobs.
of course, the governor would dispute that narrative and say, no, he has legitimate concerns about China and also about the tax structure of the plant. So more to be determined on this issue and all the others that we've spoken of. I want to thank Anna Bryson and Dave Ress and Jeff Shapiro for joining me here today. And so I would encourage folks to follow our coverage on richmond.com and in the Richmond Times-Dispatch.